Chapter 17. What is it, mate? Hutch asked Phil, who was leaning forward with one dirty hand spread on the dark bark of a thick tree trunk. Phil hadn't said much to anyone since they woke him, and he'd shrugged off any attempt to speak of how he came to be naked in that tiny, sordid space that they had all used as a urinal at some point the night before, except for Luke, who had gone outside. Luke, Hutch, and Dom were all too tired and shaken to talk of their own experiences in any detail either, each acknowledging in an unspoken way it was the sort of thing you only discussed once you were at a safe distance from the source. But the night seemed to have affected Phil worse than the others. See it? And it's on all the other trees on this side. Where the bark had been sheared away or smoothed down in a band about the tree at waist height, Phil's red fingers pointed at a series of marks or scratches, cut deep into the wood, which had then darkened with age but not become entirely invisible. Hutch bent over and traced a finger around the marks. "What is it?" Luke asked. Dom sighed with irritation and looked up at the sky. "Runes," Hutch said. "I remember those runes on the stones we saw in Glammenstad." He glanced over his shoulder at Dom and Phil. "Me and Luke saw some in Skadsland and Lund too, a couple of years back." "No way," Phil said, his face stricken, as if this observation by Hutch was evidence to him of something far worse than their current dilemma. "Yes, way. Good spot, pillars. I bet these are real old too. Vikings used them about 1,000 years ago." "They can't be that old," Luke said, leaning down beside Hutch. "No shit, but someone still knew how to use them after the Vikings." Luke placed an index finger on one. "Looks like a bee. The trees go how old? This is Scots pine, big one too. Dead as a door now, but they can live for about 600 years. Dom threw both hands into the air, his waterproof swishing as he moved. Okay, what's the plan? Team time? I'd say runes on old bastard trees are at a bastard bottom of our list of priorities, boys." Hutch and Luke moved away from the tree. "It's all wrong," Phil said to himself. "Wrong." "Yes," Hutch said, then looked at the sky, so pale and white, the sun itself could have been white. Rain began to patter against their coats and rucksacks. "Great." From the breast pocket of his coat, Hutch pulled out the plastic wallet with condensation on it. The map was sealed inside. He knelt down and removed the map from its sheath. He unfolded it by one half and put the compass against it. "Chaps, I reckon we're about here. A fair way inside the tip of this band of woodland. I was trying to get us down to here yesterday, so we can pick up at the Capotgale Trail. Morning's walk on that, and we'd be beside the store of Livion River. Following that east to Skytee for a few hours would put us by the overnight cabins here, a branch office of the Environment Protection Board. But we can't make it any further south through the shrub here. This place is so old, if there was ever another path going south or out of this clearing, it's gone now. And if the undergrowth doesn't clear up, there still is the best part of a day between us and the end of the forest." "So what?" Dom said. Hutch wrinkled his eyes and gritted his teeth in a wince. "Well, we can't risk following that track north." Phil said nothing. He stood apart from them and stared at the house. Hang on. Give me the map," Dom demanded. Hutch pulled it away from Dom's grasp. "What are you going to do with it, Hobbles?" "Let me see, you Yorkshire ring piece." Dom snatched the map from Hutch's hands and held it a few feet from his face. Luke hung his head and pulled his fingers down his cheeks. "Maybe we should go back the way we came in." Dom shook his head. "No, if we go back the way we came in, it'll take a whole day just to get back to where we started from yesterday at noon." "As long as we don't get lost again," Luke said. No one else took him up on the observation. Hutch and Dom stared at each other with tense faces. Dom's jaw trembled. "Then another day to get back to the STF cabin we left 2 days ago." "Agreed," Hutch said to Dom. "All the same amount of time again to get to Rajor on your bad leg, so I think we should see where the track we used to get here goes, in the opposite direction. Then, if we can cut down south from it at some point." Dom frowned. Well, it ran from west to east in a straight line. It'll take us straight back out west. What's west? Norway, Luke said. Dom slapped the map down against his thighs. I'll need to get south, H, to come out on the other side of this blasted heath. You don't say, but I can't get through, doofus. There's no way we can move south from here. And we've enough good food for one more day tops. Considering how many calories we're going to be expending walking on terrain today, we'll need every crumb of it. For argument's sake, if it takes us all a day to get out, we'll have to camp tonight above the river. Tomorrow, on the outside with this blasted heath, our army will be marching on an empty stomach for about half a day. That's the worst-case scenario we are facing. So there's no need to panic, but we have to make the right choice now. No indecision. I'm confident that if we just retrace the path, it'll lead us more or less above a good point to make an exit. With any luck, the trail might naturally turn south at some point. Skite isn't that far away. A day and a half tops at the very limited pace. Luke lit another cigarette. We cannot risk staying lost in this wood for much longer, H. Spark us one up, mate, Hutch said. Luke placed his cigarette between Hutch's lips. He took out another of the packet from himself. Hutch squinted through the smoke at Luke. Trail must go somewhere. It was cut out of this wood a long time ago. We didn't follow it from its source, we just kind of happened to cross it yesterday, and followed it east. We originally came in on the far westerly side of the narrow band of forest. It brought us east to collect our position. West, it gets really thick again, about 30 kilometers deep, I'd say. But if we stay on the track we came in on for as long as we dare, we'll move faster, and avoid all the fallen logs and shit that made Domsha bitch like a baby yesterday. If, then, we can cut south at some point, we'll be out by late afternoon. But then, Luke rested a tip of his tongue between his teeth. Hutch looked at him, surprised Luke would object to his idea again. What? He heard the irritation hardening in his tone. That's if the woods south of the track clear up at all, and following the track further west will mean new ground again, the unknown. Going somewhere else in the wood that might not be an exit, our precise downfall yesterday. Why would you make a track that just endlessly snaked around inside the wood? Hutch asked. It has to be the vestige of a way in and out. There's no sensible alternative, Chief. I think there is. It's total ball ache, but we go back in the direction we came in, and then try to pick up from where we crashed through yesterday, or take that track north and hope it leads to the top edge of the forest. Oh, fuck off, Dom cried out. We've been through this. We'd have another day walking across those pissing boulders to get to where we started from. Another day's walk to Portius on the other opposite side. But we know the way we came in leads out of here for certain. This path might just stop 2 miles deeper inside this shit, or run in a straight line to Norway. As soon as we put one foot on it, it's already leading us in the totally wrong direction. Hutch blew out another geyser of gray smoke and winced. So turned around in their mate. I honestly cannot say whether we'll pick up our tracks again, and these two won't make it back through that crap. We have to stay on the level as much as possible, Phil. Phil, how are your feet? Not good, he said, without turning his head. He put his hood up. Fucking fucked up is what they all are. Like my knee, Dom snapped. Luke turned to face Dom. Well, if you hit the gym like we agreed, Dom. Oh, listen to the gentleman of leisure. I've got 3 kids, mate. Try hitting the gym when you work 60 hours a week and have a family to support. Hutch raised both his hands. Boys, we're wasting time here and we'll get pissed on. At least on the path we'll have a bit of purpose. If it goes nowhere, we'll make a judgment call. And either break south through the crap again, or we try to find our way back to the way we came in yesterday, like Luke says. But that's got to be last resort, considering the condition some of us are in and how difficult it is to even move across the terrain. Phil finally spoke, but kept his back to them. The last thing we want is to be in here again at night. Chapter 18. The very thought of which was exactly why Hutch could not prevent the unnaturally vivid images of the dream from recurring as he walked slowly away from the hovel, with one of Dom's arms around his shoulders. He'd never sleepwalked in his life before. He could still visualize the details of the dream as if it were a film he had seen the previous evening in a cinema. His mind clawed through the dim and grubby recollections for some kind of sign, some sense that would explain exactly why he had risen from his sleeping bag and climbed the stairs to the attic, then found kneeling before a hideous, rotten effigy. 2 figures had been standing beside him in the dark downstairs of the house. That was how the dream began. Old faces with dirty teeth told him to climb the stairs. I told him that someone was waiting. "Don't keep them waiting," they had said. "Your clothes are in the fire." And up he had gone. Up the black wooden stairs. He desperately didn't want to climb them, but the will of the dream would permit no turning around or going back down. He tried to stop his ascent, but remembered going numb and being unable to breathe. So up he went. And to think he had even been physically climbing the stairs at the same time. "Not so fast, H," Dom called out beside him. Sorry." Hutch slowed down. His feet had been bare, the soles black with the filth on the old wooden stairs. Hands out, he'd steadied himself against the dark wood that had felt wet underfoot. He was naked, his body thin and pale and shivery. It felt like a little boy tottering for his bath. Yes, he had been smaller and younger in the dream. He desperately wanted to be covered, protected. There were no windows in the house, just a faint reddish light coming from up there. Around the corner of the staircase, he then staggered into the attic and opened his mouth to call for help, but no sound had come out of his mouth. There was no air inside him, like he was winded. Inside the red place, he'd kept his head down and his eyes fixed on his dirty feet. Dirty and wet. Wet from the piss that had tickled warm against his thighs and dripped down his calves. He tried not to look up, because something was in there with him, snorting with excitement because it could smell his piss and fear. Bones. There were bones on the floor. They made it all worse, especially the ones with the gray bits attached, and some of the little bodies had gone so black he could not tell what they had once been. On the stained planks, he'd stepped around the bones, but some still had crunched under his blackened soles and slid around his grimy toes. The bones got bigger as he moved closer to the snorting sound, and then he could smell it. Dug in straw, cattle sweat, and sulfur stink. It made his eyes water. A goaty breath panted over his head and bare chest and made him cough. The taint had still been inside his mouth when Luke woke him. In the dream, the knocking began when he smelled it, near him. Sounded like wood banging against wood, in front of him, and he could not prevent a peek at what made the hollow knocking noise. Black hooves. Once again, they reared up in his mind, big and sharp with yellowish bone at the tip, wide as a horse's feet, snapping down against a wooden box that had sat inside. Bang them with excitement it did. The black rim of the wooden box was chipped and grooved. Its glee grew as a soft white body came closer. So close. Coming out of a big head, he heard wet snorts and deep whinnies. Clack, clack, snap went its hot mouth with the yellow teeth inside, like a trap. Before him, below him, cut smooth into the front of the box, had been a small circular gap to rest his throat, so that his head would hang into the unbreathable musk of devil and animal. His head was to hang below its teat-pocked belly, pinkish under the longer black hairs. Then those hooves would smash down like a hammer onto a dinner plate. Bits of skull littered the dirty straw beneath the black stick legs of the thing. The forelegs were long, and down they came again and again to make the imbecile rhythm of hoof on wood. Its body had been so tall, like it had long outgrown his little cradle, and he knew the horns on the terrible head were scratching the beam in the middle of the ceiling. And over he had gone against his will, into the blinding stink, and the sound of his own cries were obscured by the knocking. Speeding up, drumming with no rhythm on the scarred black wood. He still seemed to hear the echoes of it now, which is why he could not stop his hands from shaking. Into the worn circular slot in front of the little box, he'd rested his throat. And up went the thin black forelegs, up toward the ceiling together, and paused to have a second, before they came back down. So fast. And then Luke had been beside him, shaking him, waking him. Look through there, and there, 2 of them. Luke's voice broke in his reverie. Hutch looked up and squinted at where Luke crouched down, further along the trail, pointing off into the trees. Hutch's stomach contracted. Chapter 19. They had been traveling for 2 hours westward on the increasingly overgrown track where Luke noticed the 2 buildings engulfed by the undergrowth. When no one answered him, he turned his head and looked at the other 3 coming up the narrow trail, their elbows out, fending back the stiff, wet branches that hung from the enclosing tree line and draped belligerently across most of the open space. Dom and Phil were both limping. Hutch was hanging back to help Dom over the fallen logs that had begun to present themselves in alarming frequency beyond the place they had joined the trail the night before. Luke walked point all morning. It was better to go first. He would be the one to see the way out, and by walking out front, all the time yearning for trees to clear and for a vista of escape to present itself, you were better motivated to keep going. Look! Luke cried out louder this time, to be heard over the din of rain scattering through the canopy of trees above them. He pointed in the direction of the dark sides of 2 indistinct buildings. The wooden planks of the visible walls bulged with damp and were black up to the dim windows, though it was hard to tell if they were shuttered or not. A suggestion of a stone chimney jutted from the end of one building before becoming obscured by a mesh of foliage. "Was that, Chief?" Hutch called back. "Nice little cafe?" "Or some big bastard Wolverine," Dom added. Luke waited for the others to draw level with him. "Another 2 houses." Hutch was breathing hard from supporting Dom's weight over the last fallen log. He looked at where Luke was pointing. Between their position and the 2 buildings grew a thick bed of nettles with black thorny stems. Above the nettles, the bare branches of dwarf birches and willows formed a 20-meter portcullis of crisscrossing sticks, choking the spaces between the larger trees. It was impenetrable. "Just keep moving," Dom said. "Don't know what's inside them." Luke nodded. "I genuinely hate to think. Wonder why they're here." Hutch rested a hand on Luke's shoulder. "I'm a fag off you?" "Sure." Luke reached for the side pocket in his waterproof trousers. Hutch put the cigarette between his lips. "Must be an abandoned settlement, where more of them mad fuckers lived," Dom said. "No one's been here for a while." Hutch looked down at his feet. His track must have joined up with them with the other place. "See this?" He prodded his foot under a blanket of bracken and lifted it. "Ruts from a cart wheel under there. You can still see them at the sides of the track." Luke rose back to his full height. A knee joint cracked. He visualized the unwelcoming interior of the 2 buildings. Wet, lightless, spoiled with rot and animal spur. He imagined the despair they would feel in the comfortless air and the desolate age of the place. "How is it looking ahead?" Hutch asked, breaking Luke's absorption that made his thoughts sluggish. More of the same," he said. Hutch moaned and rubbed his hands over his face. "We're not making great progress, guys." "Piss off," Dom said. Bent double, he pushed at the sides of his injured knee with both filthy hands. Raising the foot off the ground like a lame horse, he grimaced. Phil said nothing, but stood and stared in the direction of the abandoned buildings. Luke took a deep breath and exhaled. "Why don't you guys take a breather? I'll scoot ahead and see what's what further down. It might open up." "I try and clear some of this shit off the path before I get down there. On my hands and knees at this rate," Dom said. Luke smiled. "With what, a camping spoon?" Hutch cackled. "Make sure you keep the edges neat." Luke moved ahead, more quickly than he had walked all morning. The slow pace set by Dom was reviving his backache, and his impatience was fast turning to irritation and a total flattening of his spirits. At times, it seemed as if the path had actually come to an end. When he met a blockage now, of which there were many, at least he could turn about and just force his way through backwards, with his arms held across his face to protect his eyes against the whipping branches that scored his cheeks and forehead. It was all difficult ground, and one of his ears was bleeding, but he didn't have to keep stopping while Hutch held the branches up for Dom and Phil to shuffle through, nor was he subjected to Dom's constant moaning. Phil still hadn't said much. He was either mute from the pain in his blistered heels, or so dead on his feet that he couldn't think straight enough to form a sentence, or he was still in shock from the night before. Maybe all three. 20 minutes out of earshot of the others, and the path stopped moving in a straight line. It began twisting about in ancient trunks, sometimes rising and sometimes falling away. It became exhausting and hard on the joints to haul himself up a tangled incline, festooned with slippery tree roots, to then suddenly descend over uneven ground on the other side. A tree seemed to have fallen about every 20 feet. He couldn't believe how much his chest hurt. He thought he was fit. Despite the smoking, he'd worked out 3 times a week and ran at the weekend, but it was no preparation for this kind of exertion. He tried not to imagine how Dom and Phil felt. They were all pathetic, getting lost like a bunch of amateurs, the kind of idiots who attempted to climb a mountain without proper training or the right gear, or those wankers who tried to crossing a treacherous water and ended up diverting the ocean's shipping in a search and rescue. People who were lauded as heroes of survival upon rescue. Why? They were nuisances. He could not believe they were fast becoming one and the same. He put his head down and smashed through the bracken, gritted his teeth, and forced through the pain barrier in his chest and thighs. Refused to be defeated. Enough now. Some sky, that's all he wanted. A bit of sky and some open ground, soft with leaves, so he could weave effortlessly through the trees. A branch dug into the loose cloth under his arm and propelled him backward and onto his backside. He snatched at the branch and tried to snap it, but the supple strength of the wood resisted and made his arms feel like water. He remained seated and panted to get his breath back. Hutch insisted they were beginning to angle southwest, more or less, but Luke had instinctively felt himself being led back northwest on this trail, and no nearer to the edge of the forest than they were the previous night when they made camp. He could not stand much more of the suffocating wet wood, forcing him into a crouch, knocking him about, tearing his skin. His throat burned. Dried sweat was producing salt on his skin and chafing the insides of his thighs, and breathe his belt all the way around his waist. He wanted to tear his clothes off. Thick with pain, the muscles in his legs began to cramp. They had to get out of the heavy stuff. If the undergrowth didn't clear very soon, he would walk back and find the others. Then he would retrace their steps back to where they had come onto the trail the day before, alone if necessary, and he'd go for help. Whether Hutch agreed or not, his instincts were telling him they were approaching that time, the time for drastic action, of one of them going for help. He cursed Hutch's decisions again, his ridiculous, baseless optimism. Jesus, Hutch, what were you thinking? Grinding his teeth, he ran through everything Hutch had said that led them into this mess. His lips began to move, and he said things about his best friend he knew would make him cold with guilt and warm with shame later. Luke closed his eyes, tried to calm down, to think straight. Slowly, the intense heat of the sudden rage died away and left him shivering. It was so dark where he sat in the wet verdure. The light was descending to the forest floor, but the rain found its way down. The entire wood was sodden. He felt dizzy and took an energy bar from his coat pocket. His hollow stomach ached. Did they even have enough food remaining for one proper meal? He began to imagine what would happen if he never moved from the spot. Would his body ever be found, concealed beneath these bushes and weeds and nettles? Or would his bones be picked clean by teeming insects and foraging rodents? A too clear image of the remnants of his dirty camping clothes, a faded rucksack, and his browned bones grinning from the dark leaves propelled him into a squat. His lower back ached from where the damp seeped up through the seat of his trousers. The black soil sucked the warmth out of his body. Back on his feet, he pushed on, driven by the desperate hope that somehow, miraculously, at the end of the trees, it would present itself at any moment. But when he had long passed out of shouting distance with the others, he began to worry that he had left the path and was crashing off through the undergrowth in entirely new directions, being led by the forest into the places the thickets were more sparse. At times, he would stop and reassure himself that he was following the faint outline of the man-made track, because if he wasn't, he would never find the others again. There are no landmarks here. It was all the same, and then more of the same, stretching into forever. Thirst burned out of his stomach, up and into his dry mouth. The last of his water had gone over an hour ago. Save sucking rainwater off leaves from where it dripped all around them, they would need to find running water before the day was out. He doubted any of the others were carrying anything but empty canteens either. After 30 minutes alone, he blundered into a granite pilf, a standing stone concealed by ivy. Chapter 20. It was the silence Hutch gradually became aware of, though he decided against sharing the observation with the other two, who hobbled beside and behind him on the rapidly narrowing trail. About him, he imagined the forest holding its breath in anticipation. Since they have moved away from the derelict buildings, the birds had stopped their sporadic clatter. There was no breeze. Beyond the scuffling of their feet, the almost inaudible patter of rain, and the whipping of leaves against a waterproof fabric, the forest had fallen completely silent around them. It was a stillness that provoked a reaction, a response. He found himself looking with uneasy eyes into the thickets on either side of the diminishing trail. And had they just changed direction again? He wasn't sure. In places, the trail now seemed to have disintegrated into a deceptive-looking shadowy hollows, areas that promised either passage through the choking obstacles pushing them to either side of the faint trail, a vague path he'd often had to stare at hard to even recognize among the tangles of briars and pale green ferns. The light had dropped. The canopy was so thick here. Again. He worried about Luke becoming lost, stopped and wiped the sweat from his eyes, was suddenly furious at himself for letting Luke just tear off on his own. Stop. Huh? Dom asked, between his heavy breaths. Phil stopped. His breath wheezed in and out of his bulk. Hutch heard him suck hard on his inhaler. What is it? Dom whispered. Hutch held up his compass, angled it away from Dom's wet, red face. Northwest. He wanted to scream. They were shuffling off course again. They were slanting up and back into the forest, going deeper, not down and outwards. They had been turned around too incrementally for it to feel like a definite change of direction. But when? How had that happened? He would have noticed. Were he not so encumbered with Dom's heaving, uncoordinated bulk against his left side, he might have been more alert. No good. He shook his head. What isn't? This direction. He let go of Dom and slapped his hands against his hips. Shit. Chapter 21. At first, Luke thought it a natural outcrop of rock. They had seen plenty of boulders and even cliff faces on the first day of the hike, which suddenly reared up from the green earth. But once he'd pulled himself around the stone and torn some of the wet ivy from an inclined side, he saw the worn runes. They covered one complete side of the rock. They were ringed by an oval border, thick with petrified lichen. He turned about, lowering and raising himself on his ankles to peer through the surrounding thicket that had overrun the rock. Between the mesh of dead wood and the thigh-high weeds that coated it, he saw another of the standing stones about 12 feet away from where he was crouching, and then another beyond it. Breaking away from the face of the stone and lowering himself even further, he rediscovered the path that wound about the 3 stones, but was now impossible to walk upright upon. He tried to move forward, but his pack became immediately stuck in a branch and held him fast. Swearing through his clenched teeth, he reversed his body, then removed his pack, groaning when the hot weight of it fell behind him into the leaf mulch and dirt. Against the ground, he clawed forward along a natural tunnel that formed over the surface of the trail. Was it the trail? Yes. He stretched out an arm and followed the cartwheel rut with his fingertips. Small animals must have worn the tunnel through with their scurrying. Face down, he squirmed about and felt the cold, damp soil embrace his chest and stomach. He would move as far as he was able to see if the foliage cleared from the path ahead, but this was the very last effort he would make in this direction. They'd already been traveling for 4 hours since sunrise and were no closer to getting out. Once he'd ascertained he had reached the end of the stretch of track beside the standing stones, he would go back and tell the others it was time for the last resort. His plan, his idea. They could have been 4 hours into it by now. It would take every last one of them to get out before nightfall, if they could even find the route they had come through the day before. After 20 feet on his stomach, the steely light suddenly brightened and the range of his visibility increased. He had reached the end of the natural tunnel and could even look up above the ground level. He pushed his wet and bedraggled body onto its feet and broke through the lighter saplings about the exit. Lifting his legs high to clear the thorns and nettles, he took a step forward into an area where the forest cleared of the thicker trees and presented an airier space of thigh-deep undergrowth and dwarf birch, a little growing higher. The rain came down in silvery spikes. The jagged pieces of exposed sky he could see through the upper reaches of the wet spruce bordering and overhanging the clearing were bleak and dark with rain. A bit of white sky was all you got up here at about 5 a.m. It just went gray. Path was somewhere beneath the undergrowth. It must have been, because it had once led to a building. Luke stood still and stared across the clearing at what presented itself to him on the other side. A church. And what he had just crawled through was a cemetery. A very old one, too, if the graves had been marked by standing stones. Chapter 22. None of them said anything when Luke reappeared, without his rucksack. He'd been careless, rushing back to find them. A deep scratch was hot and inflamed down his left cheek. It had bled along his jawline and coagulated, and he was unaware that the tree branch had just lashed into his mouth, had cut the top lip, and painted his teeth with a scarlet film. Dom and Hutch just stared at his wild eyes, breathless attempts to speak, and at his wet and cut face. On his way back from the cemetery, he had been gripped with an urgency that made him feel hot and loose and angry inside. He'd begun pulling branches that hung across his return path, had even stopped to smash flat some small toadstools, because getting back to the others had been harder than his leaving of them, as if the forest forbade it. He was reminded of his dream. He was not grateful at all for the recollection. He'd stopped a dozen times and unhooked the sharp ends of broken branches from his jacket. It was now torn under one arm. He could not remember the undergrowth being that bad coming the other way. The constant hampering and snagging of the foliage and his uncoordinated stumbling through it made him hot and dizzy with a rage familiar to him and always unhealthily. He had cursed the wood, cursed Hutch, cursed Dom, cursed this wood and his reduced position in it. He boiled, and every step of the way back to the others, his thoughts had been dark with the image of the decrepit, broken church and the dismal, wet world. And when he found them again, he could not believe how slowly the other three had been moving, how little ground they had covered since he'd been away. He felt as if he'd had to retrace his steps all the way back to the same place where he had left them. Luke straightened up from where he had once been bent over to catch his breath. "I thought I lost you. What happened?" Hutch asked. "Huh? Your gear. Where is it? I dumped it. It was slowing me down." Dom looked at Hutch and frowned, as if this act of madness confirmed a belief he had long held about Luke. "What the fuck are you going to sleep in then?" "Not permanently, just so as I could get back to you guys faster." "Why?" Hutch said, with a nonchalance that annoyed Luke. "You find something?" Because what?" Dom asked. What the hell was wrong with them, ambling down the path like this? Dom and Hutch had been smiling about something when he reappeared. He even thought he had heard them laughing from a distance. "Are you even taking this seriously?" he asked, and immediately wished he hadn't when he saw Dom and Hutch's surprised faces. Phil stood behind them. He had more color in his cheeks now, but looked at Luke with a mixture of disappointment and caution. The hood of his coat was half off his head and made him look ridiculous. "Course we are, you silly arse," Dom barked. "Think I'm enjoying this?" Hutch said Dom quietly, but there was something in that rebuke, something about Dom's flat, stolid, scowling face, and something in Hutch's supporting grin that made Luke think his vision had lightened, as if the terrible pressure of rage that suddenly filled his body again had forced the darkness out of his eyes. He felt weightless. He could hear nothing but a hot rushing through his ears. His voice seemed to originate from somewhere outside of his head. He didn't recognize himself in his own voice, as if it was a recording played back at him, to his embarrassment. "You call me that again, I'll put you on your fucking arse." He watched his own progress, as if disembodied, as he walked 3 steps up to Dom, whose face went pale and stiff, as if he'd been forced to look at something unpleasant. A remote part of Luke remained conscious of what the other bigger part of himself was now doing on instinct. It was the rage he had brought back to them from the trees, the endless wet trees that would never let them go, and it demanded an eruption from him. "Did you hear me, bitch?" He shouted into Dom's face, and watched a droplet of froth from his own shouting mouth hit Dom's cheekbone. "Luke!" Hutch shouted from behind him. "Whoa!" But he was not to be brought out of his trembling, mad place until something snapped him out of it. With both hands, he shoved Dom backwards, hard. Dom lost his balance and dropped his weight onto his bad knee, then fell sideways into the undergrowth. Something swished behind Luke, and hard fingers clamped around his biceps. He was pulled back and away from Dom, his feet clearing the ground at one point. All the strength seemed to leave his body for a moment. He scrambled to find his feet when Hutch let him go a few feet down the trail. "You fuck!" Dom struggled to his feet, all chubby arse, shirt pulled down in clumsy, stiff movements. Then Dom was coming at him, the limp gone. Hutch was knocked aside. The whites of Dom's eyes were going pink to red. His freckled knuckles moved slowly and made a wet slap sound against Luke's mouth that he felt like a push, not a blow, but it made his top lip instantly go numb. "Is that it?" he thought. "Is that all a punch feels like?" They all seemed to stare at each other for a long time, until the idea that he had been struck mingled with the supporting notion that this was a contact that stated he should just continue to accept Dom's jibes, criticisms, bullish rants, and his disregard for anything Luke had said since they had met the night before the trip. But his role assigned to him in their little group hierarchy was not one he would accept any longer. When he swung his fist from the left, he'd taken his arm back enough to make his shoulder go tight, lock, and then release his hand like a spring. Dom's arm didn't rise quickly enough to defer the strike, and Luke's knuckles impacted with a loud smack under Dom's right eye. Dom's head snapped back. His expression was one of bewilderment and distaste. Luke's second fist came in from the other side. He watched his own arms, and his wet khaki sleeve whip out quickly to make a hard fist strike Dom again, this time on the jaw. He had been aiming for the jaw. Dom went down quickly, and he didn't get his arms out to break the fall, because his hands were still clutching at his face. Hutch and Phil took a step away from Luke, almost cowering. They looked at him like he was a dangerous stranger. They were shocked, frightened of him, but he wanted to keep on punching. He wished Dom had not go down so fast. Then he could feel the satisfaction of hitting his face really hard again and again with clenched fists. It had not hurt his hands at all. The subtle release of energy, twinned with Dom's fall, gave him a sudden lunatic rush of euphoria. His body seemed to reform itself again into a tight, stable, and defined frame. His whited-out vision rushed back into his head and returned to full color. His hearing cleared as if a blockage of warm bathwater had just drained out. He realized he was panting so hard he had started to wheeze. Dom sat up with his legs splayed and his head dipped over his chest. Both of his hands were clutched around his mouth. No one could see his face. Dom was crying. He was so angry he was actually crying. "I'll not spend another fucking minute with that bastard." From where he sat on the fallen log, Luke could hear Dom's voice penetrating through the trees. It was high-pitched now and squealing. "He could piss off in the opposite direction. No, I fucking won't. It's not you who's had that bastard have a pop at you. That loser's a handed case. He's always been. That's why he can't hold a job down for 5 minutes. And why he's always single. Makes sense, don't it? He's a twat. I don't have the patience for him anymore. Who does? He needs to fucking grow up. I've no time for this stupid bastard. Then the terrible heat was back inside Luke's body, and he was suddenly crashing and stumbling back to where Hutch and Phil were holding Dom out of sight. His teeth were gritted so hard. Luke regained enough control of himself to know that a tooth could snap at any moment and fill his head with a white lightning of agony. He unlocked his jaw. "Keep it up, you fat fuck," he bellowed in the same into view, and watched Phil and Hutch scramble aside. Dom put two hands up and shouted, "Piss off!" This time he was punching so quickly between Dom's raised palms, he immediately felt something rip at the base of his neck, then go tight and hot. 3 punches littered across Dom's face, and Luke felt a nose slide, then snap under his knuckles, like the wishbone at a Sunday roast. The 4th and 5th blows struck the top and back of Dom's head as Dom collapsed into the undergrowth. He curled himself up into a ball on the floor and pulled both arms over his head. The last punch hurt Luke's little finger, the knuckle above it, and the bone beside his knuckle. He put a hand under his armpit and stepped away from Dom. Another word. Another word. He tried to speak but was breathing too hard to get it out. His voice was trembling with emotion. "Jesus Christ, Jesus, take it easy, shit." Hutch was talking quickly and holding Luke's shoulders now with iron fingers, leading him away. "Any more from him and I'll put him out of the game, I swear." They walked together, away from the other two. Hutch's hand around his elbow. Dom had not uncurled himself from the ball. Phil was crouched down, talking to Dom in a low voice, but Luke could not hear what he was saying. "Jesus, Luke, listen to yourself. You're talking like a bitten chav. This isn't you. What the hell?" Luke sat down on a fallen log where he had been a few moments before. His hands were shaking so badly, Hutch had to take the packet out of his hands and light 2 cigarettes, one for each of them. "Calm down. Take it easy. Just relax. Cool your boots, man. What's gotten into you?" Luke didn't speak, just smoked the cigarette in quick inhalations until he felt sick. So much cortisone and adrenaline had leaked into his empty stomach, along with phlegm and cigarette tar. He thought he might throw up. He unzipped his coat down to the waist and bent over, sucked in cold, wet air in great heaving in lungfuls. He'd never felt so drained in his life. He started to shudder. "Well, I guess that's the official end to the holiday," Hutch said after a few minutes' silence. Luke started to smile, felt ashamed, then found himself laughing in silence. Hutch was smiling too, but only as a part of a thin and pained expression. He shook his head. "Didn't know you had it in you, Chief. God knows I've been thought of giving Dom a shoo-in over the years, but people like us just don't do things this way. What were you thinking?" Luke looked at Hutch and saw the disappointment in his friend's eyes, the permanent estrangement. You could never come back from an event like this. Nothing could ever be the same again. He knew his friendship was over with all 3 of them. "Shit," he said, and shook his head. He had to take a moment and swallow hard several times, otherwise his eyes would well up and he'd start crying. A lump closed in his throat down. It would be impossible to speak for a while. He stood up and walked away from the dead and fallen tree. "What am I doing here?" Luke said. Further down the path, Hutch had followed him, his head bowed, his face pale and long with the strain of dealing with them all, on top of the situation they were in. They were forcing him to be a parent, to make every decision. "I couldn't even afford to come, but I won't have him call me a loser." His chest was going tight, and he wanted to say so much to justify what he had done because of how Dom made him feel, but it wasn't coming. Hutch looked at the sky and blinked as the rain hit his face. "I better get back to the walking wounded. He doesn't know anything about me anymore. Nothing. None of you do. He doesn't mean anything by it. No one does. Am I being a prick?" Hutch looked at his feet and sighed. "You think so too? It's okay, say it. I don't give a shit anymore. I'm happy to take off now, Hutch." "Don't be so free with crazy talk. We've had enough of that. I meant to get help. We're not there yet, not by a long chalk. This is just a setback. And I do wish you'd all just chill out a bit. This isn't really helping. I'm sorry, I just lost it. You don't say. They couldn't look each other in the eye. They looked at the earth, at the sky, at the endless trees and bracken all around them that were all utterly indifferent to them. And I went for miles, H. I reached the end of the line and got snagged buggery. I found a way out, and when I came back, I just got so angry I lost it. Because you'd hardly moved, like there was no urgency. It's crap and you know it. I meant, I can't walk. They're both broken. I was just trying to keep the spirits up, keeping them talking and trying to take their minds off the situation. And I fucked it. Totally. Luke sighed, touched his face where Dom had hit him. It wasn't even sore, just puffy. I had so much to tell you. Hutch turned his head to the side. See a way out? Luke shook his head. No, it just gets worse, all this shit. He kicked at a bush. Hutch closed his eyes and made a groaning noise, then opened his eyes and sighed. Next year, we're renting a caravan. I was just about to throw the towel in and come back when I found a cemetery. Now he had Hutch's attention again. Luke nodded. Tors, standing stones, whatever you call them. Rune stones? Rune stones, all overgrown in a big thicket that I crawled under. But on the other side of it is a church. You're shitting me. I'm not. A really old church, like one of those buildings we saw in Skansen, and the housing museum, and the forest clears up a bit around it. Hutch's face brightened. Let's go. They walked back along the track toward the others, who were still out of sight. Luke slowed down. I'll keep a low profile and walk out front. Good idea, but it means I'm stuck at the rear with the fear again. Cheers. Luke was about to laugh, but Hutch wasn't smiling as he turned and walked away. Thank you. That was part 3 of The Ritual. Thank you for listening, and good night.